Hello and welcome to the DSR Daily for Tuesday, April 15th. I'm your host for today, Riley Fessler, joined by Minna Stein. How are you, Minna?
I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I'm good. I was kind of doom spiraling last night reading some of the news. So, not really positive stories today. I'm gonna give a spoiler up front, but let's
No.
not beat around the bush. Why don't we get right into it?
Okay, good idea. The Trump administration has proposed slashing the budgets of the State Department and USAID by nearly 50%, targeting humanitarian aid, global health, and international organizations, including massive cuts to funding for the UN, NATO, and peacekeeping missions. The plan, detailed in an internal memo, assumes USAID will be folded into the State Department and outlines layoffs, program eliminations like the Fulbright program, and a new $2.1 billion discretionary fund for Trump-era priorities. The proposal faces bipartisan skepticism in Congress, with critics warning it would undermine U.S. global influence and empower adversaries like China and Russia. Yeah, this cut also will drastically cut the State Department as well, so it's also going to decrease in size because USAID will, their employees will now be working at the State Department. And Marco Rubio has not commented on this decision. However, he has until today outlined in the memo. So hopefully we'll be hearing from him on this decision, this idea soon.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine he'd be happy about this. Some appointees, especially under Republican administrations, are appointed to agencies for the express purpose of dismantling them. And Mark Rubio does not strike me as one of those appointments. He's one of the more competent people in the administration, even though we don't like him. Mm-hmm. He is inarguably one of the more competent people in the administration. So it didn't seem like that was the purpose. So slashing the budgets by 50%, I mean, that's pretty crippling. And we've seen that this administration isn't particularly interested in international diplomacy or playing by international rules. So I'm not totally surprised. But I'm skeptical how much the bipartisan criticism will actually manifest. But, it's going to ultimately, for these things to be stopped, it's going to take Republicans to stand up and do something about it. And they haven't seemed particularly interested in doing so outside of a few notable holdouts. Whether or not we see that expand to more as this becomes less politically tenable, maybe, but I'm not really counting on it.
The rumor that I read when researching this news story is that this memo is pretty universally disliked, and it has bipartisan dislike in Congress. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But that's the rumor. That's the word on the street.
The problem is there's been a lot of things in the entire time Trump has even been in politics where we hear, Republicans don't like this. Republicans in Congress don't like this. And then they don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to feel optimistic when we hear, even the House Republicans don't like this, because then they end up voting for it universally anyway.
Yeah.
So I'll believe it when I see it, when it comes to there being a bipartisan agreement to stop this. I just don't really believe it, but I'm hopeful.
Every day I hope to be surprised.
Well, shifting gears, President Trump expressed interest in deporting violent U.S. citizens to prisons in El Salvador, a proposal legal experts say would violate U.S. law and the Constitution. His remarks have raised alarm among civil rights advocates and sparked debate about the legality and ethics of such actions. Trump stated he would only pursue the idea if deemed legal, though no U.S. law currently allows for the deportation of citizens. The White House confirmed the proposal was being considered following El Salvador's offer to house U.S. prisoners. I don't believe them for a second that they would only pursue this if deemed legal. They clearly have shown, and we'll get to this in my next story, that they don't really care about what the courts say. Their strategy has seemed to be to ignore it. They were ruled against 9-0 by the Supreme Court, and they have basically said, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to try and bring him back. So, I don't think they will only pursue this if it's deemed legal. I think they're going to pursue it no matter what, because they don't really care too much about what the courts say until the courts and Congress will make them care. Until that point, I think they're just going to keep soldiering on and just ignoring the courts. So this is another case where we really need congressional Republicans to grow a backbone to say, hey, we need to enforce this. Until that point, they're just going to ignore the legality of the actions they take, especially with the previous Supreme Court action saying anything a president does is legal. And then just ignoring the Supreme Court, this is terrifying because, spoiler alert, it's not going to stop with violent criminals. If they manage to get away with this for violent criminals, it's going to extend to more and more people.
Well,
it's all about pushing the envelope further and further.
Trump was quoted recently as saying, homegrown criminals, I'm fine with.
Yeah.
He did say that. So rest easy, everyone.
Yeah.
Crazy. And I do think that, one of the only ways the Republicans are going to flip on Trump is pressure from the people who vote for him. And I do think that is happening, more and more town halls are being canceled. People are going to the town halls. They're screaming at their representatives. Races are tightening. There's been 7 elections since Trump won, and Republicans have only won 2 of them. So it seems like small progress, and it is small progress. However, I try these days to think of the bright side of things, to stay even a little bit hopeful. And that's what's keeping me hopeful today.
Yeah. And, people always talk about the frog in the boiling pot, where the heat is turned up a little by little so that the frog doesn't know it's being killed. The Trump administration really hasn't done that. They pretty much cranked the heat all the way up from day one. And I think that is to their detriment.
I agree.
Because they immediately started deporting people they shouldn't be. They immediately started talking. I mean, it's only been a couple months and they're already talking about deporting U.S. citizens. They didn't ease into this at all. If they had done this over the course of 4 years, where, after 2 years, all right, well, now that we've deported the violent immigrants, what about now we can do violent U.S. citizens? No, they're talking about deporting citizens 3 months in.
Yeah, and I
don't think that's a wise strategy. I can't imagine even Trump supporters would be on board for that. Maybe they'll say, I don't know. They hate crime, so maybe they'll be for it, but I don't know.
It has kind of been that way across the board with the Trump administration, even with the tariffs. Everybody thought, oh, it's going to be strategic. It's going to be it's going to be on these specific countries. And it was just extreme to everyone day one. And I do think to be a successful leader, authoritarian or otherwise, you have to give the people something to be happy about. And there's nothing for anyone to be happy about. And so hopefully that will push people in every district, but in this case, for the sake of this discussion, Republican districts, to put pressure on their representatives to change things.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Well, going off of that story, President Trump has deepened ties with El Salvador's authoritarian leader, Nayib Bukele, using their alliance to defy U.S. court orders, most notably by refusing to return a man unlawfully deported to El Salvador from Maryland, despite a Supreme Court ruling. Bukele's refusal to release Kilmar Abrego Garcia provides Trump with a pretext to ignore the judiciary, further escalating tensions ahead of a criminal contempt hearing. The growing partnership, including talks about sending American citizens to El Salvador's brutal prisons, underscores the Trump administration for Bukele's hardline tactics and signals a troubling embrace of authoritarian strategies in U.S. governance. Yeah, Bukele was at the White House recently, and they had a very strange conversation. Trump seemingly very much looks up to the El Salvadorian president, who has called himself the world's coolest leader. I feel like that's not true. it is subject to personal opinion. Don't know if everyone agrees with him, but he thinks he's the world's coolest leader. And it was just one of those classic Trump, weird fests of like, we love the El Salvadorian people and you're amazing and thank you so much and we love you, and just very bizarre. But, just added to the list one more authoritarian leader that Trump is kissing up to.
Yeah,
At our White House.
Great ally you have there, where it's like, hey, our Supreme Court says we need this guy back, and he's like, no, I don't think I will. It's like, why? I mean, it seems like there's no. I don't understand the reasoning for Bukele to be like, yeah, I really want to keep this guy, and I won't send him back. It doesn't make any sense. There has to be something going on behind the scenes, because that just doesn't. It's not logical. I don't know why he wouldn't be willing to send Garcia back. There has to be something going on that we don't really know about, and I'm hoping that we will find out in the coming days of why that's their position. It's kind of bizarre how dedicated this administration is to not bringing Kilmar Abrego Garcia back. It doesn't really make sense. It's just, it seems to be they just don't want to admit defeat by any cost, even if it means on like keeping this man who should be in the U.S. out of the U.S.
Well, they did say if he figures out how to get back to America from the El Salvadorian prison by himself, that they will let him back in.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he'll manage that, getting out of one of the most
so kind
prisons in the world by himself.
Wow.
And booking a flight on American Airlines back to the U.S. Whereas with their president saying, "No, I won't release him." Yeah,
they love justice and also peace.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Well, speaking of a story I alluded to earlier, despite a court order barring retaliation, the Trump administration blocked Associated Press reporters and photographers from an Oval Office event with President Trump and President Bukele. The dispute stems from the AP's refusal to rename the Gulf of Mexico per Trump's executive order, which the court ruled was protected free speech. While a federal judge ordered that the AP not be excluded based on its editorial stance, the administration is appealing and arguing that changes need not be made until the appeal is resolved. The AP continues to fight for full access, though its future participation in Oval Office events remains uncertain. We've kind of said it all on this story. They're just going to ignore the court until they can't anymore. If that even happens, it could just be that they can keep ignoring it without any penalty. But it's just amazing this is over something so petty. The refusal to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America is just stupid.
It's quite dumb.
I admire the AP for standing by their words and not backing down on this. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they are successful in this legal battle, but I don't know if success will even make a difference.
Let's hope so. The Trump administration froze $2.2 billion in federal funding to Harvard University after the school refused to comply with a list of government demands related to combating anti-Semitism, which included governance changes, ending DEI programs, and limiting the influence of certain campus voices. Harvard President Alan Garber rejected the demands, calling them unconstitutional and an attempt at direct governmental control over academic freedom and campus ideology. The administration, which has formed a task force to investigate anti-Semitism on campuses, is taking a more aggressive approach compared to other universities like Columbia, which complies with less severe measures to avoid funding cuts. This is gross for a lot of reasons, but I do find being authoritarian and like choking out universities in the sake of fighting anti-Semitism to be like really offensive and disgusting on a deeply personal level.
Yeah, the irony is impossible to ignore of being like, well, we will force you to comply with investigating a university and withdrawing aid for the sake of fighting anti-Semitism. And then under the list of things that they want to do is end DEI programs. Like, what does that have to do with anti-Semitism?
Nothing. And actually, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. But,
I can't imagine that people are buying that excuse.
I hope not. It's so transparent, especially when you match it up with like the things that he said about the El Salvador, him as in Trump, what he said about the El Salvadorian prison, or no, sorry, not about El Salvador, about there's so many crazy things he says. It's hard to keep up. But when he was talking about Hamas and he was like, I can't believe they weren't kind to you like they were, like the Germans were. You're so dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism and yet this is how you talk. Like, what are you? I'm infuriated. I'm enraged.
I mean, again, the Trump faithful will pretty much believe anything. So, like, them, whatever. But, like, the median voters that swung for Trump, so as many as existed, there's no way that they are believing this. I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to limit my exposure to the right-wing echo chamber for the sake of my mental health. So, it's hard for me to tell what they've been saying about this. You know, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how, you know, one of the biggest names on the right is Ben Shapiro, who, you know, makes a lot of his Jewish identity is a huge part of who he is. And I'm curious how he is framing this. You know, is he supportive? I don't know. Like I said, I refuse to engage with the right-wing echo chamber at this point because it's just, it's not helpful. They're going to continue to spin their wheels in the mud and believe whatever they want. There's not much to be gained from listening to what they have to say.
Yeah.
So
he's just like the Trump like administration, or just, and Trump specifically, just like constantly scapegoating Jews, like saying, oh, if we lose, you know, you'll know who to blame when he's on the campaign trail. Like, it'll be the Jews' fault if I don't win. And now he's like scapegoating Jews again, but like under this weird guise of helping them, which clearly it's not.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
And it's only hurting everyone. It's just really gross behavior and fascist.
Well, yep, we'll see. It's hard to call anything else, but who knows what will happen next. It's impossible to say. But we will continue to cover it right here on the DSR Daily each and every day. We'll be back tomorrow, and we've got more podcasts on the way, so please stay tuned. But until then, stay sane, stay safe, and bye-bye.